Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. The United States and Israel carry out over 300 airstrikes across Syria as the rebels get ready to form a government. The US and Israel say they are preventing ISIS from gaining ground amid the chaos in Syria. China says it is deploying its largest Navy fleet for the war drills that include surrounding Taiwan. Beijing says the drills come after Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te ignored their warning and visited the U.S. territories of Hawaii and Guam. An airstrike in Sudan's western city of Darfur kills at least 100 and wounds hundreds more. Neither the army nor its rival paramilitary rapid support forces have taken responsibility for the airstrike. A mystery disease is spreading in the Democratic Republic of Congo, claiming the lives of more than 100 people. Doctors say the disease has flu-like symptoms and is affecting children the most. And Brazilian President Lula da Silva undergoes surgery for a brain hemorrhage related to a recent fall. Doctors say the operation was successful and the Brazilian leader is now recovering in hospital. Hello and welcome. Our top focus is on the ongoing unrest in Mozambique. Violence in the aftermath of the disputed October presidential elections has caused deaths and destruction in the southern African nation. But it has also caused tensions at its borders with neighboring countries. South Africa has once again shut its main border crossing with Mozambique. The border closure comes as violence was reported at the Mozambican side of the crossing. Trade flows had resumed through the area after South Africa partially lifted its first suspension last month. However, on Monday, South Africa's Border Management Authority announced the halting of general cargo processing and passenger movements through the key trade route until further notice. The operations have been halted at the Limbombo border, the main crossing between Mozambique and South Africa. It is a major trade route for Mozambique's coal and South Africa's chrome exports. As per reports, South Africa will face a financial loss of around $560,000 daily due to the border's closure. It will be a sharp blow to the mining and logistics sectors and comes at a time when South Africa's mining industry is already grappling with labor disputes, regulatory uncertainties and rising crime. Mozambique will also be hard hit as reduced exports undermine a key source of foreign exchange for the country. After the announcement of the border closure, long queues of trucks have been reported at the border.
Really frustrating because we thought that time will be in Mozambique, but we are still waiting. And then worst part of it, we're gonna go inside around about 4 o'clock. So can you imagine, Hore, what time we spent here? It's almost 6 hours. We're gonna sit here and wait for 6 hours.
It is not just South Africa, but unrest in Mozambique is also hurting neighboring Eswatini. Eswatini, which is a major exporter of sugar, is expected to face heavy losses. Its sugar industry is seeing disruptions to supply chains and exports. Eswatini's sugar industry depends heavily on a terminal at the port of Mozambique's capital, Maputo. It is through this port that Eswatini sugar is sent to the European Union and the United States. In 2023, the Eswatini had generated $305 million from more than 26,000 tons of sugar export. But Eswatini Sugar Association now warns that chaos in Mozambique poses a grave threat to the country's exports to regional and European markets. And this has forced the southern African nation to explore alternate routes. However, that is expected to strain the transport infrastructure and incur additional costs. Tensions are flaring at Mozambique's borders in the wake of the deadly post-poll violence that has killed at least 90 people since October. The ruling Frelimo Party's candidate, Daniel Chapo, was declared the winner in the disputed polls with over 70% of the votes. However, the opposition candidate, Venancio Mondlane, has called himself the true winner. Mondlane has fled the country amid the violence and is mobilizing protests through social media from South Africa. Thousands of Mozambicans have been rallying against the election results, triggering a heavy crackdown by police and security forces. But as the anger and violence is not receding, it is having an economic impact on not just Mozambique, but other neighbors. It could also create distrust among investors in these nations. How can the Southern African nation navigate through this business disruption and the security risks amid Mozambique's post-poll violence? Now, for more on this, we have with us Kanye Magobane, political analyst, who is joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you for being with us, Kanye.
A very good afternoon to you and your viewers.
Now, how has this unrest following the disputed presidential polls impacted trade and supply chains in the region, particularly South Africa's coal and chrome exports and Eswatini's sugar industry?
This is definitely a regional issue, as you've alluded to, because it's such a central country that connects many other neighboring countries like South Africa, like Eswatini, and even countries, like Namibia, Lesotho, Zimbabwe are also impacted by these crises that are happening, because they also have trade investments between these countries. And definitely the ports have been one of the most serious targeted areas. Now, we know that in local Mozambican media, Padesmo leader Venancio Mondlane has said that what is currently happening right now is phase 4, which will target the capitals across the country, as well as the ports. Now, South Africa in rands is losing about 10 million rand a day, like you said, just over 500,000. And what this points to is a type of political failure in the region, because we need to analyze and just unpack the events, as opposed to just following the events. What does it mean politically for us? The SADC region leaders recently met in Harare, where this was one of the issues that was raised, the issue of the Mozambican elections that are being contested. And yet we see these protests continuing. So my question is, what political will do they really wield in the region? And are they still being taken seriously anymore? Do they still wield the same political power and influence?
Yes, and Kanye, what are the broader economic implications for Southern Africa if these border tensions persist? And what steps are the neighboring countries taking to mitigate these disruptions?
Well, I think we can just start by looking at South Africa and why they decided to suspend operations. I think that first things first, South Africa has to protect South African companies, from any type of violence and protests that may result in trucks being vandalized, being, looted by protesters. So that there's a vulnerability to the sector. And what this also points to is the government's failure to erect regional rail structures, because we are relying on trucks, because we don't have an effective rail structure that used to be there, where trains used to be able, to move between Mozambique and South Africa and Swaziland and Mozambique to take a lot of these goods. And so with trucks now being suspended from moving in between South Africa and Mozambique, that has had an immediate economic impact on the region. And it's set to continue for at least another 7 days. And the question is, can the region really afford to lose up to 70 million rand a day? And that's a couple of million US dollars just based on political violence that the region has failed, to manage.
And as you mentioned earlier, given the regional reliance on Mozambique as a transport hub, how might this unrest influence future investment and trade dynamics in Southern Africa?
Well, I think that this has brought us to a point where the neighboring countries with Mozambique have to raise security issues. They have to raise security issues with Mozambique because these are their products that are passing through these trades and to these trade ports. And if there's political instability that's going to affect their business, there's nothing stopping these companies, for instance, from diverting to South Africa, from diverting to Cape Town, and that's going to be lost trade on Mozambique. If they choose like other ports, like Richards Bay, is a goods port that can be used instead of Mozambique, and we know that they desperately need this trade with other countries because it does benefit the country and the economy positively. And Financial Mondlane and his cronies know this, and this is why they are specifically trying to bring the country to its knees. And the question is, who's funding these protests? Because we know that the numbers of the protesters keep dwindling by the day, because it's very expensive to sustain this level of protest, especially when one is not in the country and is a fugitive opposition leader, as he's now been named.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being with us, Kanye. Thank you for your valued insights and analysis on the latest out of Mozambique.
Thank you so much.
Now, Syrian President Bashar Al-Assad has been dethroned. The Syrian dynast was forced to flee his country, which he and his family once ruled with an iron fist for nearly 5 decades. Assad and his family are now in Russia's capital, Moscow. They reportedly struck a deal with the Kremlin to grant them asylum.
And now for the breaking news from agencies. The former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is in Moscow and has received asylum in Russia. This was reported by TASS with reference to the sources in the Kremlin. Assad and his family members arrived in Moscow, and Russia granted them asylum for humanitarian reasons, the source said.
Because Russia was once a staunch ally of the West Asian nation, Vladimir Putin had to come to Assad's aid multiple times in the last decade. It began in 2011 when anti-government protests rocked Syria as Arab Spring demonstrations grew in the region. It was then that Putin backed Bashar al-Assad and deployed Russian forces to Syria to prevent the government's fall. Now, since 2014, Russia has maintained a sizable presence in Syria. Russia operated a major airbase in northern Syria in the city of Hmeimim, and there was a major naval base in central Syria in Tartus. Now, from these two bases, Russia would deploy its warships and combat jets over West Asia. However, over the years, the Russian bases in Syria became more than just Russia's power projection in West Asia. As Putin grew operations in Africa using the Wagner Group, now the Africa Corps, Russia began using Syria as its connecting piece in the African puzzle. Using the airbase in Syria, the Africa Corps mercenaries would refuel and redirect their logistics to Africa. From Syria, the Africa Corps would launch towards either Libya in North Africa or Sudan in the central region. Now, from Libya, the Africa Corps would then spread out into the Sahel region, particularly Niger, Chad, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And from Sudan, the Africa Corps would then push into the Central African Republic, Sudan, and South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Equatorial Guinea. Ever since the anti-West movement began in Western Africa, military juntas of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso and Chad have cozied up to Putin. And Russia now sends weapons and military instructors to these countries. In return, Russia gets essential minerals, including uranium and gold, from its African partners in Central Africa. Russia has always had a major presence in the Central African Republic, and Moscow has expanded its ambitions in Sudan and South Sudan. The Africa Corps has been helping both the warring sides in Sudan, that is the Sudanese army, and its rival paramilitary rapid support force. And since 2022, the Africa Corps has earned more than $2 billion just by acquiring gold from Sudan. As the Africa Corps has gotten richer, it has announced more involvement in the continent. The Russian mercenary group, that is backed by the Kremlin, wants to set up and operate military bases in Africa. And they have picked Libya as their anchor, with a proposed airbase in Al-Qadim and a naval docking port in Tobruk. With access to a shipping port, the Africa Corps will be able to increase its operations in the neighboring Sahel states. The Russian mercenary group is keen on trading and exploring more oil and gas reserves, gold, uranium, and other critical minerals from the Sahel region, particularly in countries where military juntas have recently kicked out Western troops. Russian involvement in Africa was made easy with bases in Syria in West Asia. Now, Putin's mercenaries would use Syria as a connecting point to Africa, and this was made possible until Bashar Al-Assad ruled Syria. However, with the ouster of the Syrian dynasty, the fate of Russia's presence in West Asia hangs on loose threads. Moscow says it is open to talks with the Syrian rebels. However, with Bashar al-Assad getting asylum in Russia, the Syrian rebels could have more demands in the negotiations. But the Russian president is no pushover, which means that Putin will be rethinking strategies on how to maintain and sustain a sizable Russian presence in Africa. Our next story is from Niger. The junta-led West African nation is reeling from Islamist violence. In the latest, Niger's military has launched a massive operation in the country's west to hunt down insurgents. This after at least 21 civilians were shot dead last week after assailants on motorbikes attacked a goods convoy. The attack took place last Thursday near the town of Terra. Thousands of goods lorries that daily pass through that area. It is around 175 kilometers away from the capital of Niamey. It lies near the borders with Mali and Burkina Faso, and the military-led nations have also been hit by Islamist insurgency. The frontier lands between the three Sahelian nations have long been a hideout for terrorists linked to terror groups like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. While the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda-linked violence grows in Niger's west, it is also facing attacks in the southeast, near the borders with Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria. Terror groups like Boko Haram and the Islamic State in West Africa remain active and have carried out deadly attacks in recent weeks. Niger's military junta is conducting two major operations in the west, as the region has increasingly been the focus of tit-for-tat attacks between the military and local armed groups. Niger's army also said that one of its troops had been killed in a device explosion attack last week. Now, these attacks come at a time of heightened violence in the Sahel region. The military rulers in the region have kicked out Western forces, particularly France and the United States, and have turned to Russia for support. Niger used to be an important partner for Washington in the fight against armed insurgents. However, after the military seized power last year, Niamey has ordered the US and former colonial power France to withdraw from the country.
If the people of Niger as a whole have decided that a particular force should leave, then that force must leave. And that is the will of the people. And the will of the people must always be respected.
It's been too long since France brought its army here to Niger, but they haven't been able to eradicate terrorism, so they have ulterior motives. We're not really happy that they're with us because we know very well that they're slowly destroying us. We've lost a lot of brothers and a lot of paramilitaries.
Military leaders in West Africa came with a promise to tackle the security crisis better. However, violence continues to grow in the region. As per reports, some 1,500 civilians and soldiers have died in jihadist attacks in Niger over the past year. Millions have been displaced in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger due to the violence. But while the military leaders pledge to ensure the people's safety, they are yet to deliver on their promise. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. South Africa's iconic planetarium in Johannesburg is reaching for the stars again. Renamed the WITS Anglo-American Digital Dome, it is set to reopen with groundbreaking technology, offering an unforgettable journey through space. With immersive visuals, cultural storytelling, and a bold focus on learning, South Africa aims to generate interest among students about outer space, where science meets wonder. More in our next report.
Something magical is happening in Johannesburg. The city's beloved planetarium, now reborn as the WITS Anglo-American Digital Dome, is preparing for a grand reopening early next year. After a dazzling 2-year transformation, this historic site is ready to ignite imaginations and transport visitors to the stars.
You could, through this deep immersive exercise, find yourself as a corpuscle navigating through the bloodstream as it enters various organs of the body. Or you can imagine yourself moving towards the center of the galaxy at light speed. You could even imagine yourself being a gamer, projecting your games and playing with other gamers across the world on this mega digital dome here.
Since 1960, the planetarium has been a gateway to the cosmos. Generations of school children, dreamers and science lovers have been enchanted under its dome. But now it's entering a bold new era. With 10 cutting-edge projectors and surround sound, the dome will deliver breathtaking views of galaxies, planets and the mysteries of space.
We have 10 projectors, Sony projectors, and this projector is essentially and a surround sum of 8.1. So it's quite a powerful system, and the projectors work very simply. They come together. It takes a long process to align them, and when they align them, they're blended together to create the full dome.
The dome's visionary director calls it screen time that matters. She says, it's not just entertainment, it's inspiration.
So these are things which is not just screen, like not all screen time is bad also. So this is screen time, but you actually get to learn a lot from that whole 20 or 30 minutes. You will actually learn a lot from that. And I think that is actually quite, and it's also not just TV, it's like you can see it surrounded. So you get a 360-degree view. It's quite immersive, so I think it's the experience much different.
The planetarium's journey, on the other hand, is as fascinating as the stars it celebrates. It was Africa's first full-sized planetarium and played a pivotal role in South Africa's scientific community. And much of this legacy can be traced to its first director, Professor Arthur Bleksley, a trailblazer in science communication. He made the cosmos feel accessible to all. His passion lives on in the dome's mission to make science exciting, relatable and fun. But this new chapter isn't just about technology, it's about storytelling. The planetarium opened in the 1960s. 9 years later, it aired the landing of Apollo 11. Then in the 1990s, it introduced laser shows and launched mobile outreach in 2015. The planetarium then celebrated 6 decades of wonder in 2020, and back in 2022, they announced its most ambitious transformation. So now, as the WITS Anglo-American Digital Dome opens its doors, it's not just reviving a landmark, it's reigniting curiosity. The space will be a place where kids dream big, adults reconnect with wonder, and science comes alive for everyone. So, when the dome reopens, answer the call and let the stars take you on a journey you'll never forget.
And that's it on the show for today. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.